In this list, we'll be going over the top 10 worst main quests, side quests, or quest lines that have been released over the years. These are cards that are 1-mana spells that have various conditions you need to meet in order to get the reward in its card text. And at number 10, we have the Last Kaleidosaur. This paladin quest requires you to cast 6 spells from your hand onto your own minions. Then, when you complete the quest, you get a Galvadon, a 5-mana 5/5 beast that adapts 5 times when you play it. Adapt was a newly introduced keyword at the time that lets you choose one effect from 3 options to give your minion from a pool of 10 unique buffs, like giving your minion Divine Shield, Poisonous, or Stealth. This card may be some people's first choice when thinking of what the worst quest has been, especially since a song was written in commemoration of how bad this quest was when it was first released. But over the years, this quest has actually aged quite well. The thing is, when this quest was first released, Paladin had some of the worst buff spells in the game, like Blessed Champion and Hand of Protection. And while you could use removal and negative buff spells on your own minions to get the quest progressed, this would just cause you to go -2 in card advantage and would often lose you the game on the spot. It also didn't help that the good buff spells they did have at the time were very expensive, and weren't easily or searchable since Paladins had bad card draw at the time too. So for a while it was completely unplayable, until the Libram archetype came out and was buffed. The Libram archetype released years later revolved around reducing the cost of Libram spells with a Dull Attendant and a Dull Truthseeker so that it could play all of its other Libram cards for much cheaper. These cards dominated standard while they were in rotation, with Libram of Wisdom being the real powerhouse. This card would give a minion +1/+1 and when it died, would add itself back to your hand. After playing the Libram support cards, this card would often cost 0, effectively giving your minions a permanent +1/+1. Since you could reapply it over and over for free when your minions died. By this time though, the Last Kaleidosaur was long out of rotation and in Wild, but with a Libram deck as support, buffing your minions happened so often that this quest could be completed before your turn 5 even starts. And when played at 5 mana as a well-statted tempo minion and not as a game-ending win condition, this card doesn't actually seem half bad, even if there are better cards for Libram decks to run. So although it isn't played at all competitively, it's still the least bad card on this list when compared to some of the other quests that have been added to the game since. And at number 9, we have Lakari Sacrifice. This Warlock quest simply requires you to discard 6 cards from your hand in order to add the Nether Portal to your hand, which is a 5-mana spell which creates a permanent portal on the field, which summons 2 3/2 vanilla demons at the end of each of your turns. So theoretically, once you create the Nether Portal, you gain infinite value off of the never-ending waves of imps that the portal creates. However, when it was first released, it too was considered one of the worst quests alongside the Last Kaleidosaur. The main problem was that most of the time when you discarded 6 cards in Hearthstone, it usually means a -6 in card advantage. And unlike other card games, Death Rattle effects don't work when discarded from the hand and specifically need the text, whenever you discard this, to have any extra effects. They do work even when your hand is empty, so they don't require you to always discard a card, but they're also completely random, meaning no card in your hand is ever safe. So what could happen sometimes is that you play a discard card to stay alive but discard the quest reward by accident. And at the time, there was a very limited amount of discard support, and only 4 good cards which could actually discard at all. This meant that decks which did try to make Lakari Sacrifice work basically played like Zulocks, swarming the boards and occasionally using discard cards, very rarely completing the quest and even more rarely actually using the value created by the portal to win the game. This card kind of demonstrates the issue with underpowered quests. When quests are too hard to complete, have slow or terrible quest rewards, or have few cards to help support its archetype, then it's going to be a bad card. Luckily though in Wild, this card still sees no play, but has a very decent discard Warlock deck that could theoretically include it. Nowadays, it has built up enough support from different expansions that it has decent draw to help offset the discard cost snowballing minions that can outright win games, and cards that actually want to be discarded. The only issue is, modern discard Warlock skews very aggro heavy. So a quest reward that gains a value over time does nothing to help it put in as much early aggression as possible, and still wouldn't see any play. And at number 8, we have Unite the Murlocs. This Shaman quest requires you to summon 10 Murlocs and adds Megafin to your hand, which is a 5-mana 8/8 Murloc that fills your hand with random Murlocs. Of all the quests so far, this may seem like the best quest so far, especially since Megafin's effect is great, and since the quest only requires you to summon Murlocs and not play 10 Murlocs from your hand. So why is it below the other 2 quests? Because using Unite the Murlocs is basically just a much worse version of a good deck. You see, the original quests had the mechanic where they would start in your opening mulligan, so you had the option to keep it and be one of your opening hand's cards, or shuffle it back into the deck for a different card. This mechanic was intended so that at the start of the game, quest decks could reliably play the quest on turn 1 if they wanted to. The problem is, Murloc Shaman aimed to be one of the most aggressive decks in both formats. So, spending any mana in the first couple of turns that didn't play or buff Murlocs was seen as a waste. Especially since Murlocs are a very snowball-y deck. Their gameplay almost requires them to play a Murloc on turn 1 so they can continually buff it and attack with it each turn. So, it's no surprise that even though Megafin could be a threat and refill your entire hand, it was never really played since it essentially lost to a card in your opening hand and wasted you a very important turn 1 doing nothing. Back when this card was released, the best way to turbo the quest was to use Murloc Tidehunter and Call of the Fishers to complete the quest quickly, and actually saw limited success. But that was more so because of how good Murlocs have always been, rather than how good the quest was. Even now, with more Warlock support than ever, there are just better ways to create threats and refill your hand than by wasting your precious turn 1 on a quest that isn't even that easy to fulfill by the time you run out of steam. And at number 7, we have Bizarre Burglary. This rogue quest requires you to add 4 cards from other classes to your hand and transforms your hero power into Ancient Blades. This hero power equips a 3/2 weapon that makes you immune while attacking. The reward isn't half bad, since it basically lets you deal 6 damage for 2 mana without hurting yourself. And of all the quests in the game, this is probably one of the easiest ones to complete, even during the time it was in rotation. You see, Burgle Rogue, which was named after the first card to have this effect, adds 2 cards from your opponent's class to your hand, kinda like you're stealing from your opponent's class. The thing is though, the cards you generate are at best playable, but are usually complete garbage. Most Hearthstone cards, especially from your opponent's class, are either bad or have some sort of synergy that Rogues doesn't have access to. So while you could easily complete this quest while keeping your card advantage with cards like Clever Disguise, Blink Fox, or Pilfer, the reward was not good enough to compensate for the useless cards that Burgle Rogue would often generate. That isn't to say that the Burgle archetype didn't have support over the years. In fact, it has some of the best support cards in Wild to compensate for the random garbage it would generate to make the deck work, like Vendetta and Windpaw Knoll. In Wild, there are 2 niche variants of Burgle Rogue, one that uses the Control Burgle package or Temple Burgle package. The Control variant uses Spectral Cutlass and weapon buffs to make a giant cutlass that deals tons of damage, heals for a ton, and gains unlimited durability by actually playing the trash cards from the other classes that Burgle Rogue generates. This deck is very niche, but if you were to play this quest in this deck, the quest reward hero power would create weapons that would either make you take up your weapon slot or destroy your giant Spectral Cutlass. The other variant is the Tempo variant, which just runs barely enough good Burgle cards, like Wand Thief, so that it can play the really good Temple Burgle Rogue support cards like Double Agent and Windpaw Knoll. And in this case, the rest of the deck is dedicated to other Tempo Rogue cards, with no room to run slow Burgle Rogue cards. Also, since Wild has become so fast now, Tempo Rogue doesn't really want to spend its first turn in opening card slot for any quest, no matter how quickly it can get it completed. And at number 6, we have Rise to the Occasion. This Paladin quest line has 3 quests in one, with the first quest requiring you to play 3 different 1-mana cards and equip a 1/4 weapon. After doing that, the second quest would be to play 3 different 1-mana cards and upgrade your Paladin hero power. Then the final quest is to play 3 different 1-mana cards again, and to add a Lightborn Carryall to your hand. The final reward is a 5-mana 7/7, which permanently gives all future Silverhand recruits you summon a +2/+2. So, the first thing that makes this questline pretty bad are all of the restrictions it has for each step of the questline. First, it requires you to use 1-cost cards, meaning that your deck will be almost entirely made up of 1-drops. Second, it needs you to play them, so any spells, hero powers, or minions that summon other 1-mana minions won't count towards the quest. And finally, for each step, all of the cards that you play have to be unique. So if you draw 2 of the same 1-mana card, you can only play 1 of them for that step of the quest. Also, you may think Twin Spell, a keyword which adds a copy of a playing card once, would be good in this deck, but no, you can only use it once per quest step. In total, this questline requires you playing 9 1-mana cards, but you can't even draw enough cards naturally to finish this quest by turn 5. And even after spending all of your card advantage to finish the questline, the reward you get is still not even that great. The 5-mana 7/7 Carryall you get is decent, but having to rely on summoning 2 3/3s each turn to win is just barely better than the Nether Portal. That's not even mentioning how you likely only have measly 1-drops to help you push for lethal, and how you won't have other ways to summon Silverhand recruits since the deck is so focused on running 1-drops. I don't really understand what Blizzard was trying with this questline, since the quest rewards don't synergize at all with what the card needs to fulfill it. This deck tries to win by swarming the board with Silver Hand Root quest rewards, except the pressure they create is negligible since the deck is made of useless 1-drops that don't work with the Silver Hand Recruit. And at number 5, we have Sanctuary. This Paladin side quest strangely costs 2 mana and summons a 3/6 with Taunt, if your opponent doesn't damage you during their turn. So it functions kind of like a secret where your opponent has to keep damaging you, otherwise you get fairly beefy Taunt minions. The card also does not work on your turn if you don't take damage, and is the only quest in the game that doesn't cost 1 mana. So, the way it theoretically could be used is on turn 2 and force your opponent to spend their hero power or other direct damaging spells on your face for a couple of turns to stop you from summoning a 3/6. The thing is though, this card usually only works when your opponent either has no cards or mana left, or basically when you've already won anyways. It may seem like a good idea to use it as early as possible to stop early aggression or as an early threat against slower decks, but in real games it usually performs pretty lackluster. All aggressive decks ideally want to play a minion on turn 1, so if by the time you play Sanctuary on 2, they can just repeatedly attack into your hero while continually stacking on the pressure. If you do manage to clear the board and stop damage for a whole turn, you've won and don't need Sanctuary as a win more card. Or when you're against slower decks, you'll be playing cheap minions to draw through your deck or be fine with using their hero power to stop your Sanctuary from going off. So in most cases, it's just a -1 in card advantage and loses you 2 mana, with most opponents able to negate its activation for free with their minion attacks. And even when it goes off, the 3/6 taunt minion it makes can't even attack the turn you get it, since the side quest triggers on your turn and as a result gives your minion summoning sickness. And just to put the cherry on top, side quests have almost no archetype support, since they don't start in your opening hand and require you to actively have it on the field. This card might be good in a very low power level environment or in metas with few viable aggro decks, but ever since Sanctuary was printed, neither of those two scenarios have happened yet. And at number 4, we have Clear the Way. This side quest simply requires you to summon 3 rush minions and summons a 4/4 beast with a rush when you do. Rush, for those who don't know, is a keyword that lets minions attack immediately but only into enemy minions. The best thing about this card is that it only requires you to summon rush minions, so cards like Wound Prey and Desert Spear could proc it. The thing is though, rush minions really aren't that great unless they can stay alive or have some other synergy. They're really seen as removal spells that are minions most of the time, and have some support in Hunter, but most of them have low health and will die after they trade into something. When this card was printed, it was probably during a rotation that could best support it, and it still wasn't played. Blizzard at the time decided they wanted to stop printing charge minions and start putting more rush minions into the game, so there were a pretty decent number of played rush minions, even in Hunter. But there was never a critical mass of good rush minions to include that could consistently complete the side quest when drawn. Remember, even if the quest only cost 1 mana, it also cost you a card to draw it, which could have been another card which did something better or sooner than Clear the Way. And while there were maybe 4 cards which could be played or summon rush minions for a total of 8 cards in a Hunter deck, Hunter's only viable deck at the time was Highlander Hunter, which required 30 unique cards in your deck to work. So with its consistency cut in half, it wasn't worth running more bad rush cards so the side quest could potentially be completed when you drew it. It's even difficult to make a rush Hunter deck in Wild since, like mentioned, most rush minions have high attack and low health and are too easily cleared off the board. And also, as a side quest, it won't start in your opening hand. So even if you do build a deck around its decent reward, you won't be able to consistently draw it from your deck. And at number 3, we have Final Showdown. This Demon Hunter questline has 3 steps, with the first one requiring you to draw 4 cards in 1 turn to reduce the cost of the cards you drew by 1. Then you need to draw 5 cards in 1 turn to reduce the cost of the cards you drew by 1, again. And finally, you need to draw 5 cards in 1 turn to add a Demon Slayer Kurtress to your hand, which is a 5 mana 7/7 that permanently reduces the mana cost of the cards you draw by 2. To start with this questline doesn't just require you to draw 13 cards over the course of the game. No, it requires you to draw either 4 or 5 cards all during a single turn. That means each time you end your turn or finish one step of the questline, your progress with the number of cards you drew that turn resets. For example, if you drew 3 cards and ended your turn from your natural draw and using acrobatics, your progress for that step would be reset to 0 drawn for your next turn. This meant that Final Showdown decks had to save up their draw combos since it doesn't matter how much they drew during a turn, it didn't advance the questline. Demon Hunter does have some of the best card draw in the game though, with Skull Gul'dan and Spectral Sight seeing lots of play in aggro and combo Demon Hunters. The best card to use for this quest was Glide, a 4 mana spell which shuffles your hand into your deck and draws you 4 cards. Or if played from the leftmost or rightmost position in your hand, would also make your opponent do the same. With an empty hand, this card could be a +4 in card advantage while also resetting any card advantage your opponent potentially had. The issue is, with the final showdown deck, most of your deck is dedicated to drawing and staying alive, so your hand would very rarely be empty. Also, if you outcasted this card, it kinda just removes all card advantage you get from the quest requirements, since your hand often has 8 to 10 cards, and also resets your mana reductions from the quest when you shuffle your cards back into your deck. And if you do manage to finally get and play Kurtrus, you've already drawn through so much of your deck to complete the quest that only a couple of cards in your quest will get reduced before you hit fatigue. That's not even mentioning how, even though card advantage matters a lot in other games, in Hearthstone you need to pay mana for your cards to be played on the field and be useful. Drawing cards without developing any minions or interacting with the board at all is a surefire way to be blown out by aggro, or just be straight out outvalued by control decks. This questline suffers once again from requirements which are too hard to do early in one turn, and with a quest reward that doesn't synergize with a near empty deck. And at number 2, we have Making Mummies, another Paladin quest. This quest requires you to play 5 reborn minions and transforms your hero power into Emperor Wraps, a 2-mana hero power that summons a copy of a friendly minion. For those wondering, reborn is the keyword that when a minion dies, it comes back to life, but only with 1 health, and loses its ability to be reborn again. Again, at first glance, this card doesn't seem too bad, especially if any good reborn minions or reborn support have been printed over the years. So, have there been any? No. So far, there have been only 12 reborn minions printed that Paladin could use, of which only 3 of them see any play and in very different decks. This deck basically aims to play Hearthstone, but most of the cards only have reborn as text and no impactful effects when played. That's not even mentioning how many of them cost 4 or more mana, which is a lot in either format, and have no support cards that benefit reborn minions at all. You see, reborn is kind of like a backwards divine shield, where instead of having 1 health shields that takes the hit first, a 1 health reborn minion is summoned after the main minion dies. This means that unlike Divine Shield, any buffs that you put on your reborn minions won't carry over to the minion once it dies once. Also, the quest reward doesn't give reborn to copies of minions if they died once and only work on friendly minions. So even though you can summon a 2/2 copy of any of your friendly minions, if one of your reborn minions dies once and loses the ability to reborn, its copy won't have reborn, the whole point of the quest reward. Also, you don't even have the flexibility to get a 2/2 copy of one of your opponent's powerful effect minions if you need it. Maybe if really good reborn minions or ways to search reborn minions get printed, then maybe this card would be better than some of the other cards on this list. But as it is, the cards you need to complete the quest are just so bad with the quest reward not being much better. And at number 1, we have Hack the System. I honestly don't know what Blizzard was thinking when they made this card. Hack the System is a quest that requires you to attack 5 times your hero power and transforms your hero power into Unwrapped's Core, which is a 2-mana hero power that summons a 4/3 vanilla minion and is refreshed when your hero attacks. Again, this quest may not seem that bad and was best built around a Temple Warrior shell. The thing is, weapons weren't really that great at the time, and the weapons that were played weren't for their high durability. The thing about weapons is that you can only have one equipped at a time, can only use them a certain number of times, and can only attack once per turn, at least most of the time. The best weapons usually have high attacks so they can kill multiple minions or push a ton of damage towards the face before breaking. That's kind of why weapon-only decks have never worked since, like mentioned earlier, you can only attack once per turn, have a maximum of 1 attacker, and have a limited number of attacks, unlike minions where you can have 7 and push for damage for free. So to attack 5 times to complete the quest, you would have to use a high durability but low attack weapon. This meant you can complete the quest very slowly over 5 turns, but you also wouldn't be able to kill enemy minions with your weapon since it was so weak. Some cards did eventually let you attack more than once per turn, like with Sulthraze, but the problem was that you had to attack minions with your hero and take tons of damage while doing so. And once you did complete the quest, it was another slow, value-generating hero power that did nothing to help you if you were at low health or needed to clear the board. Again, while potentially spending 4 mana each turn to summon 2 4/3s may sound good, in reality the quest was completed after turn 10, since this deck had to focus so much on trying to stay alive with few minions and spells to help them. And that's why Hack the System takes number 1 spot on this list. It was slow, poor reward that requires you to spend mana on each turn, requiring you to fill your deck with bad weapons, and has a reward that doesn't synergize at all with the rest of the deck. Alright, and that's the list. Let me know in the comments if I missed anything, or if there were any cards you thought deserved to be on this list, or have ideas for future videos just like this one.